Okay, before we do get into this, I just want to give you guys a quick reminder. I have a stack of surveys on that side table over there. If you don't mind filling that out and then either giving it to me or my husband, or you could feel free to just fold it up and put it back on the table there, we'd really appreciate it. That just helps us let us know if we covered all the information that you guys are interested in, if there were any questions that didn't get answered and we need to cover other things. That helps us just to kind of gauge what we're doing. And then also, if you are interested, there is a sign-up sheet over there on the same table. We usually just send out emails about our different events, our webinars that we do, that type of thing. So you're welcome to do that as well. Okay, this section is basically talking about how we're dealing with school personnel and school staff. And so part of the goal is to build those relationships, okay? So I want to encourage you to just think about your perspective and your demeanor when engaging in conversations with school personnel. Matthew 10:16 says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves." So our encouragement is be wise, have that discernment, know what you're talking about, and be bold, be willing to share and talk about these things, but also be humble. We're all broken, and be gentle about it. So along with that is making sure that you watch your assumptions. Most people are actively trying to love your kids. They just may disagree with you about what it means to love. So foster a relationship with them, okay? They may think that, loving and affirming your child, or children in general with transitioning is loving. They may think that educating their child about their sexual rights is loving, okay? And you might disagree with that. So make sure, especially if you are sending your kids to public school, that you're fostering those relationships, you're not making enemies. And then don't assume, I'm ahead here. Don't assume that people know both sides of the situation and are actively choosing one. They probably have only been trained from one perspective, okay? So be willing to educate people. Make sure that you are doing your work and you're getting educated on these things, and then be willing to educate others. Find resources that you're willing to pass along and things like that. I'll blame this on my husband. There was one more box I was supposed to bring, and it's really my fault. I forgot it. There is a guide. It's called Navigating Transgender Landscape, and that guide is meant for school personnel. So that is a great resource. You can download it for free on the website, or you can buy, I think it's just a few dollars, to buy a hard copy of it. And that is meant to be given to school personnel. And I believe that that's Family Policy Alliance that put that one out. But I'll double check on that again. If you signed up for emails, I'll send a link to that resource for you guys. So find a resource like that. Use that as a way to pass on to others some information about these issues. Okay, now let's look at understanding school government. And I'm going to break this down into each of these sections. So for the federal government, this is where we see a lot of the funding programs for education. There's incentives then that they give to schools so that they will adhere to the federal curriculums and standards that they have out there. But they're not the ones that create the requirements, and they're not the ones that do anything with the curriculum. So the state government sets up the educational system. Remember, we saw that a lot with some of the stuff in the last session about that it's the state's responsibility to provide that education publicly. They set up that education system. They're the ones that create those graduation requirements. So if sex education is required or not, they set up those requirements. They also deal a lot with school choice and where the funding for this goes. And then they also are giving guidance to school districts and things like that. They provide that type of guidance. Now, there are state school boards, but this is specifically, we're talking about the local school boards, the ones that you guys can go run for and be a part of. These school board members are the ones that actually create school policy. Okay, so that's super important. So those policies that we're talking about, where we have to affirm kids in their pronouns and in their gender identity or different things like that, it's the school board members who create this. They are also the ones that choose the curriculums. Okay, they also select books for the school. They also establish teacher hiring criteria, and they set the student achievement standards. So a school board member has a lot of power. The superintendents are the ones that do give oversight and leadership of staff within the district. Now there are different, sometimes schools, districts might have superintendents of curriculum, and maybe there will actually be a group of them that does that. Or there might be superintendents for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, there might be directors and assistants within all of that. So there's different kind of levels, but it's that kind of oversight and leadership of those areas. And then we have the typical things that we would think of within a school: principal, teachers, counselors, nurses, social workers, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in this section, what I want to do is run through with you super important questions to ask if you've got kids in the school district. And even if you don't, and you're just a concerned community member or you're a grandparent, these are still things to be aware of if your school is doing these things, because again, your tax money is funding that school, okay? So these are kind of a good basis for what are they doing. For curriculums and lessons, you're gonna wanna ask how you can review your child's curriculum and lesson plans. And then what can you do if you disagree with what's being taught to your children, okay? Now remember, legally what we're seeing is you really have no power, and the answer might end up being, well, you don't have to send your kid here then if you don't want to. But those are still good conversations to have with the schools, because every school is kind of at a different place right now. Some might be much more willing to talk with you through things, or you might find that the school is just, nope, this is their standard and that's it. As far as sexual content, will my child be required to take comprehensive sex education courses? And if so, when? The school's going to decide when the kid needs to go through those courses. How can I opt my child out of particular sex education lessons? And then will I be notified of the topics being taught in the sex education courses? Some sex education teachers do a great job of this. The one in Livonia near us, every new topic that teacher sends out to the parents in their class, these are the topics that we're going to cover, and the parents are aware of it. So find out, are these things going to be happening? If not, you need to be aware that you're going to have to dig deeper into these things. For books, are there any books that contain gender ideology or sexual orientation themes in the elementary and or middle schools? Can any child check out these books? And then how can I review my child's library records? We talked about that earlier. That's a parent right that you're allowed to review that. Asking with the school, how do I do that? Because again, it's up to the individual schools then of how they communicate that information to you. Just know that each state has an obscenity law. So this means that it's basically you can't show obscene material to children. But there's also an obscenity exemption, and that is that if the material that is being questioned can be viewed to have scientific, educational, governmental value, or some other justification, it is no longer illegal. So just know that when you are reviewing books in the libraries, and in our other presentations, we give you links for how you can search some of the libraries near you of what kind of books are in there. So just know that they've got this obscenity exemption that often kind of makes people realize, it's difficult to fight these books. Okay, so as far as policies go, ask, does the school have a transgender student policy guide or a gender inclusion or diversity guide? And then if so, how can you access that? And then where can you access the school's anti-bullying policy? Oftentimes, it's actually through the anti-bullying policy that other things are snuck in, so things like the social-emotional learning or things like that. So you might find that there's, you don't think of anything with the bullying policy, but they might include things in there as well. So it's good to be aware of that. As far as pronouns go, ask, do you allow your students to choose their preferred pronouns? If so, do you notify the parents if a child chooses a pronoun other than what is used at home? How long does it take for you to notify a parent if this occurs? And then, if this will be changed on school records, will I be notified? Okay? So these are important questions to ask. Now, again, because the reason why is each of these schools are going to have different policies and how they handle things. One of the schools near me, Geneseo, their policy is not to notify parents if their middle schooler or high schooler identifies as transgender and is using the pronouns. So you really have to ask, because honestly, I bet you most of the parents in that district don't even know that that's the school policy for it. Okay, so as far as counseling goes, do you notify parents before a student receives services from a school counselor? That's important to know, right? Is there a chance my kid might end up in that counseling office and I might not know about it? Are there any circumstances where you would not notify a parent before they receive counseling services? That's a good question, because they might have some things that they just, oh, this is going on with the kid, we send them into counseling, and then you've got that counselor speaking to your child about these issues and you're not aware. So if so, what are they? And then if my child struggles with his or her mental health, when would you notify me? For the health center, does my child's school have a full health clinic? That's important. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in more detail, okay? Does the health center need my permission to write prescriptions for my child or to write a referral for my child? That's important, because some schools have the power to refer your child to Planned Parenthood or somewhere else or write a prescription for them. What information is available to my child through the health center regarding things like abortion, contraception, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, sex reassignment surgeries? What literature do they have in there that they can pass along to your child? What resources do they recommend to kids when they're going in there and talking about these issues with them? For social-emotional learning, what social-emotional learning occurs in the schools? How can I review those lessons? Will I be notified before those lessons are taught? You kind of have to understand from the perspective of the school, how are they incorporating these things, and where are some of the different ways that your kids might come in contact with information or processes in the way that they do these things. For the surveys, do you use in-class surveys to collect data on students? Can I have a copy or see the survey in its entirety? How can I opt my child out of these surveys? Now, sometimes some of these questions you're going to have to ask to the principal, and then you're going to have to ask to each of the teachers, okay? So you just have to know, too, like, okay, yeah, there might be a teacher who's putting out a survey and principal doesn't know about it. So you have to ask these questions diligently in all of the different areas where your kids are going to be involved at school. As far as facilities go, are your restrooms and or locker rooms inclusive? Meaning that if a male identifies as a female, or vice versa, can they use the facility they identify with? And technically, legally in New York, yes. The answer to that should be yes, because of the gender bill. And what is the school doing to make sure my child has a protective environment within bathrooms and locker rooms and spaces? And let me clarify a little bit about what we mean by protective environment. So, according to the Department of Justice, 30 to 50% of youth are sexually abused by other juveniles, okay? So the CDC basically says that it's important to teach that one primary strategy in preventing sexual abuse is creating these protective environments. This means improving safety and monitoring in schools. So schools are already falling behind in creating protective environments for students, with almost 55,000 serious violent incidences, including rape and sexual assault, being reported in 2018 alone, okay? So now that we've got the whole gender bill changing, we're gonna see if that's increasing. My guess is it is. So schools should be working hard to make sure that there's safety for all students, okay? Not just pushing certain policies that are going to put kids at risk, but you have to inquire about that, right? If your kid's in that school, do they know what restroom they can go use, and that's going to be a safe environment for them. It'll be a protective environment. For after-school clubs, you'll need to ask what the different clubs are and what programs are available. Will parents be notified of events hosted by the after-school club or program? Oftentimes not. I mean, in the other presentation, I shared some examples from Livonia near me, where they had a transgender celebration day and they hung up posters all over the school. Pittsford near me, in the Rainbow Clubs, those are the little elementary school clubs. They ended up reading a book called The Gay BCs to the kids. Parents were never notified that any of this stuff would be happening in the school. So ask about those things. How does that work? Ask if you can be notified. Ask about the Rainbow Clubs, the GSA clubs, those are the Gender and Sexuality Alliance clubs. Ask about Bible clubs. Are there alternative clubs and things that your kids can be involved in? Ask about the drag clubs and the pride parades. Ask if those things are happening off the campus. Does the school still advertise for them? Are those things allowed at the school? So these are just different things to be thinking about and asking about. Also, ask about the celebration and the awareness days, right? So what holidays, awareness days, themed months will be celebrated at the school? Are the celebrations in the classrooms up to the teacher's discretion? How can you opt your kid out of these things, okay? So just be aware then of what is the school promoting, what is the school celebrating. And then lastly, ask how you can volunteer, right? We talked about this earlier. The more you're involved, the more you're gonna know what's happening. So in what ways can I volunteer at the school? Will I be notified of volunteer opportunities, and how can I get more involved in general? Okay, now let's talk a little bit about opting out and notification to the school. So in that resource packet that you can download that goes with the conference, there's a copy of an example of an opt-out letter. We got this from Protect Child Health Coalition, and an attorney did review it, suggested a few changes, and so we made those changes, and so that's the copy that we're giving to you. So these are opt-out letters that you can take a look at and see if you think that, yes, this would work for me for opting my kids out of sex ed courses or different things like that. So we've provided that for you. In some instances, schools do not have to inform parents about referrals, and if it is a full health clinic, they can actually write prescriptions for things like abortion pills, cross-sex hormones, and so forth for your child without your consent. And you may never see a bill for these things because they are funded through the school or the state. And so the general consent forms that get sent home that parents have to sign, they don't include everything that the school is capable of doing. So when you're signing those consent forms, the idea is that you can limit the scope of your consent. You can write directly on the form or submit a separate letter with it that basically says that the school does not have your permission to do certain things, like write those prescriptions or provide referrals without your notification and consent. So one of the things that this guide that I recommended before recommends is adding this to the consent forms. I consent to my child being treated for minor cuts and scrapes, but for anything further, I require the school to get my express consent. Now, I think this is a good place to start. The only problem is that this does not make provision for if your child needs immediate medical care, for any injury in a sport or a fall, or if they need CPR or things like this. So just be careful with how you add things and write things. I'd be much more specific, like they can't write they can't write prescriptions, they can't do referrals for my kid. But just know when you sign those consent forms, though, you're really probably consenting to a lot more than you think, which is why it's important to have that conversation with the nurses in there. What are you offering to my kids? Can you do those prescriptions and things like that? That back to school packet gives a letter that you can give to the school to access your child's library records. We've included the whole letter in our guidance, in our guide for you in case you are interested in that. And then the same thing with a letter objecting to library material. So if you do a little searching and you find things like this will help give you a guide for how to kind of formulate that objection to the school about the books. Now, in this resource, they also provide a letter objecting to the transgender bathroom policies. The only problem is with gender in New York, this letter isn't applicable in the sense that you can't argue with the bathroom policies in New York because of gender, but what you want to do is take this letter and direct it towards the school needs to make sure they are providing a protective environment for my child and an equal space for my child that is either a single stalled bathroom or something. So this can put the school on notice of what it is that you're desiring, that you're requiring this, that it's part of their rights. So again, I would still read through this, I'd still take a look at it, but just remember in New York, it is a little different because of the gender bill. Okay, so in this section, I want to talk to you guys about reviewing the materials. So there's a lot to review. So we suggest actually gathering a few other parents to do this with you. This is where being a part of a group like Moms for Liberty or some of the other groups in the area that you guys have here will help you, because then you guys can divide up the work amongst you guys. Now I'll just say this, just because you may have a group that you're a part of and you know that some of the parents are checking on this and some of us are checking on this, it doesn't mean you're not responsible for reviewing everything for your own child. I mean, it is your child, but it can help you guys dig a lot deeper into the districts if you start to partner up. So inspect what you expect, and this is just a way that we recommend breaking this down. Moms for Liberty is a very organized grassroots organization, and so what they do is they have committees. So we kind of are suggesting to do something similar to that. So for example, you can have a notification team. This team would read all of the school policies. They would read all of the letters and notifications that are sent home by the school. They would regularly check any school-related websites or social media, because a lot of times the school might post something, and if you're not going to their website regularly and checking it out, you're missing it. They would stay informed about when the school is required to notify parents and when they're not, so they might help to put together some kind of chart of, okay, these schools, this is when it's required, this is when it's not, and then it would be a good reference for parents to know, okay, I got to keep my eye on these things. And then the idea is to photograph the concerning content and communicate it to other people in your group, other parents. This is when you can take it to the local school board and say, I found this in the policies, I'm really concerned about this. If the school board says they can't do anything about it, that's not true, because that's part of their job, is they can then take a look at those policies and review those and change those policies, okay? So this is when you would take things like this to the school board. Lessons and curriculums. So again, I would recommend if you could have like a team for each of the grade levels within your school. This would just help, okay, to cover some of this information. Read the homework assignments, read the textbooks, read the curriculums, read the lesson plans. And at this point, I know it feels totally overwhelming, right? At this point, you're probably spending more time trying to figure out what somebody else is teaching your kid than if you just sat down and taught your kid yourself. Okay, so it's really challenging. That's why we're encouraging you to get together as a group to do this, so that you guys can divide these things up. Maybe somebody will take, all the textbooks that the 5th graders have to read, and they'll go through it. Also make sure that you're asking about any movies, visiting organizations, and resources accessible to the kids, okay? These are things outside of kind of the standard curriculums and lessons that we would think about, but this is actually where a lot of schools are sending kids to go look at just really inappropriate things. It's through these extra resources, or it's through the visiting organizations that come in. So, for example, substitutes will often show kids movies when the teacher can't be in. It's just an easy way to kind of cover the class period or whatever. So ask about that. What's the policy at the school for substitutes? How do I know what movies are going to be shown? Can I also figure out the lessons that teachers are going to give to substitutes? That type of thing. Reach CNY and Planned Parenthood are two organizations that we know are currently teaching in our New York schools these comprehensive sex education programs. You might have to do a little bit more digging, but find out from the schools what organizations are coming in, how can I see their curriculums and things like that, right? And then also as far as resources go, we're talking about here websites that the kids might need to see, magazines, newspapers, anything like that. My colleague Carrie, she recommended, because she's used to be a school counselor, she said that the curriculum's second step, this is a social emotional learning curriculum, actually, it seems like a decent curriculum, but then when you go to the end and you look at all of the extra resources, that's where there's a lot of concerning content. The things that teachers can pass along to kids on the side and encourage them to look at. And she said specifically at the middle school level, they're seeing a lot more of that. And then the same thing with loveisrespect.org. And I went on to this website to check it out. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but this is a screenshot. As soon as you get onto loveisrespect.org, this is the first thing that pops up. And it warns the viewer to clear their history after visiting the site. And it instructs them how to quickly leave the website by pressing the escape button twice. So many websites have this now. It's called the quick escape, okay? And the idea behind this is if you are a kid and you're getting onto these websites and you don't want your parents to know you're on the website and they walk in the room, it's gone. 1 or 2 clicks and it's gone, and nobody knows that you're looking at these websites. This is what I was talking to you guys about earlier. If somebody is encouraging somebody else to hide something, that should be a warning, right? That something's wrong. And yet, there are thousands of these websites out there now that this is the first thing that pops up. It tells kids how they can quickly escape from the websites, okay? So this is incredibly dangerous. Okay, so then the next kind of group or committee we recommend putting together is one for books. This would be somebody who's reviewing the books available in the libraries and in the classrooms, learning about the checkout policies and how parents can be notified of those policies and how parents can review their child's record. And then again, photographing any of the concerning content, communicating it to the other parents, the other people in the group, the local school board, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot to do, okay? And it can be discouraging. But if you work together, it's not as difficult. And you have a lot more support. So when you go to school board meetings, don't go alone. Go with 1 or 2 other people. You guys can either all speak together or even just be together. It's much more encouraging to do that, okay? If there is something concerning, all of the people in the group should be writing letters to the local school or to the state. If you guys do these things together, you guys can help support each other. And then consider hiring a lawyer for your group. This could help with fees and different things like this. You guys are all empowered that way with the lawyer. Okay, I feel like this is the part you guys have all been waiting for, is the school board. So I just want to remind you guys about what their job here is. So for school board members, they're the ones that create the school policies. They're the ones that choose the curriculums. They select the books. They establish teacher hiring criteria, and then they set the student achievement standards. And there was something else I was going to say, and for some reason I'm not seeing. Oh, okay, I see it. So I added this slide for you guys because the school boards do have massive power to direct the school. But we can't just focus on the school board, and I want to show you guys why. So there are some bills in committee that we need to pay attention to. And the first one is S1523. This requires the Board of Education and the trustees or sole trustee of every school district to establish policies and procedures regarding the treatment of transgender or gender nonconforming students. So right now, your board members don't have to comply with this. If this gets passed, they would, okay? right? So we're seeing how, yes, there are going to be certain things that will restrict board members. The problem is that right now when you go and you talk to them about the policies, they have been getting suggestions and guidance from the state and from activist organizations that tell them how they should be handling these things. They give them recommended policies that say, here's how you can protect these students, okay? The problem is we don't have a bill that's passed that says that they have to do transgender affirming pronouns and things like this, okay? So yes, the boards have huge control, but we're also seeing this getting limited as well, okay? Now, one of the other bills, I just have this on here, this one provides treatment for sexually transmitted diseases to minors without parent or guardian's consent. I just had this up here, it is relevant, but this one, S2584A and A6616, this one is, I have not seen it in this current legislative session. Those were the bill numbers from last session, which in some ways concerns me because sometimes they like to sneak things through rather quickly. But again, this requires comprehensive sexuality instruction for students in grades K through 12, which includes a model curricula for comprehensive sexuality education and at a minimum conforms to the content and scope of the National Sexuality Education Standards. So what this means is right now, yes, school board members have the power to choose the curriculums that they want in their schools. So they can pick a sex education curriculum that is completely appropriate, okay? They don't have to follow the National Sex Ed Standards. But if this bill passes, now they're restricted to pick curriculums that conform to those standards, okay? So there is a balance of power here, and we are seeing the school board power limited in ways if this type of legislation gets passed. So don't just focus on the school boards, know that there are bigger issues that we also need to handle as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about talking to school boards. So first of all, be aware of the school's policies. Each of the school districts are going to have their own policies, okay? The way that one of the Moms for Liberty chairs had explained it is this. It's a private meeting held in public. So you need to know what their requirements are. Do you have to sign up to speak? How? How do you register? What time limit do you have? Okay? You might have 2 minutes in one district, and then in the next county, you've got 5 minutes or however much. Things are going to change, so make sure you understand what's going on in your district. Will that meeting be recorded? Okay, there might be certain information that you're required to state. I'm so-and-so, and here's my address. If the meeting is recorded, maybe you don't want to say your address. You have to know, is it going to be recorded? What information do I have to present when I get up and speak? But again, you have to go to each of your districts and find that out, okay? The location. Some school board meetings are easy to find and some are not, so you're going to have to do your digging to find those. We did a webinar last Wednesday with 2 of the Moms for Liberty groups, and they explain a lot more about this, so I do encourage you to watch that too if you want a little bit more information about these things. Okay, this one is going to be super quick about voting for candidates. I just wanted to pass along a resource to you from Courage is a Habit. They give you 10 questions to ask candidates. We have those 10 questions in our resource guide for you to take a look at. So part of this is just being aware of, when are you voting and making sure that you can hear and get to know from the candidates and what questions to ask them to be aware of. Okay, now running for school board. So we got to talk to a couple of school board members recently, and to be honest, they said, we didn't want to be school board members. They had no desire to do it, but they knew that somebody needed to step up, and so they did. And one of the school board members gave just an awesome, encouraging story about how their school was starting to implement some of these transgender affirming policies. And he said, whoa, let's hold the phone right here and let's go through these and let's decide what we really want to do. Because affirming children in their transgender identity is not necessarily helpful. We don't want to hide these things from parents. And so At first, the rest of the board members were like, no, we have to follow these guidelines. We have to follow these guidelines. And he said, no, they're guidelines. We have the right and the power to choose what policies we want in our school. And so what he actually did was he actually moved that board, and now they actually have a policy that they have to notify parents if their child identifies as transgender. So school board members do have that power. It is happening. School board members who get in there, they do a good job of making sure they understand what their authority and power and responsibility is, and they are making changes. So that is super encouraging. And the other thing that the board members had shared with us was that oftentimes the boards feel like puppets. They feel like they're just sitting there at these board meetings and they just, okay, we're letting you all talk, but we can't do anything about it. What he actually did was he actually encouraged the board to be more receptive in listening to parents instead of just writing them off and changing that relationship. And so that's super encouraging that board members can do that too, trying to get more parental input into what's being said and allowing freer communication. So even if you feel like, man, I don't know if I can do much, even if you can get on a school board and help to start change the flavor of things, the way that the parents are being respected and listened to, understanding the authority that comes with being a school board member. Those things are super important. So even if you don't get the policy changed, you can still start making other changes in other ways as well. Now, we are pretty much out of time. So the last thing that I want to do for you is I want to give you resources and references for learning how to run for school board. So here are 3 of them. The Leadership Institute, they are an on-demand school. So at any time, you can go onto their website, you can sign up for it. It is kind of expensive, but they will walk you through how to run for school board and understanding that type of thing. The School Board Academy, their next session coming up is February 21st. So next month, almost exactly next month, okay? So I believe this one is less expensive, and again, this is School Board Academy. They're helping you to learn how to run for school board, what are the responsibilities of school board members. And then the last one is New Yorkers for Constitutional Research Foundation. This is Jason McGuire. He's a New York lobbyist, and they actually have a campaign school. They did it last year, and I haven't seen anything come out yet about this year, so my encouragement is just to keep an eye on it because they do a great job, and so I encourage you to keep an eye on that. He may also even have resources from the last campaign school that he's willing to pass along. So keep those in mind if you are interested in running for school board. All right, so let's just summarize this section. Make sure that you know your school, what are their requirements, policies, how do they handle things. Write opt-out letters and notification letters for your kids while you can, because again, we have some legislation that's sitting in committee that won't let you write opt-out letters for certain things. So keep that in mind. Review materials. I know it's a lot of work, so that's why we're encouraging you to do it as a group. Speak to your school boards, vote, and then run for school board if you feel like nobody else is stepping up and this needs to change. Okay, the last thing I want to leave you with, Monica Klein had also said that one of her findings was that teens say that parents have the greatest influence on their decision and attitude about sex if parents would talk to them. So I encourage you to do that. And then I know I said this earlier, but your children want to be unconditionally loved. So make sure that they're getting real love at home, and then they're not going to look for it in inappropriate places. Okay? All right, so any questions about any of the school board stuff or the school policies?
So before we leave, as I was sitting in the back, and I just felt led by the Holy Spirit to read these 2 verses out of 1 Peter, because with everything we're seeing, there is an influence behind all of this. And it says, "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. And the other thing Paul writes in Ephesians, when you look at the armor of God, he tells us twice to stand firm and to resist the devil. And the one who's behind the influence of government officials, the one who's behind the influence of teachers to push all of this stuff is the devil. Because our battle's not against flesh and blood. There's people who are lost, who believe they're doing the best for kids, and they don't understand they're destroying kids' lives. So, my encouragement to you as a pastor, just after listening to all this today, is first of all, if you haven't gotten involved in any way, I would encourage you to pray and seek the Lord. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to run for school board? Am I supposed to go to school board meetings? Should I get on a committee to review things? But just ask God for wisdom of where to get involved. But the other thing I would encourage you to do is to pray. You might have an administrator in your school district who is just doing things that are so ungodly. I would encourage you to begin to pray for them daily and pray for their heart. Pray for the governor of New York, that God would change her heart and that God would open her eyes. Because at the end of the day, people who are lost, they do lost and broken things. But if we just understand that ultimately, as the body of Christ, we have the authority of Jesus Christ that's been given unto us, that enables us to change the course of history. But too many times, the body of Christ, we don't understand that. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. But I just, as a pastor, as I sit back and I look at what's happening in America, I feel like there is so much that God desires to do in this country, but what he is looking at is he is looking at his people and he's saying, what are you going to do? Because if we want our churches to be more like social clubs than battleships that are going to go into war, then we're going to lose the war. But if we understand that there's ground to be taken and God's willing to go with us, there's pretty awesome things that can happen. So I just, again, want to open up, see if anybody has any questions. And if they don't, number one, I want to thank Bridget for being here today, for sharing all of this. And, anybody who is here, all of the sessions can be found on our church Facebook page, on our YouTube channel. But what I'm also going to do is the things that were recorded, I'm going to put them on Rumble also, because I never know if we're going to get kicked off of some of these social media platforms. But what I would encourage you to do is, if you have friends, if you have people that didn't even know this was going on today, just send it to them and be like, just watch this. Because I'm telling you, if 5 to 10 people in every school district across America got educated about what's happening, how to make change, and got activated, it would start an avalanche across this nation of change. But too many times, what I have come to understand is the Lord tells us that his people, due to the lack of understanding and knowledge, they perish. And when we're ignorant about things, terrible things happen. So if nobody has any questions, I'm just going to close this in prayer. And I know Bridget's probably going to be over in the back. To anybody that wants to talk to her, go through any of the resources. But again, I would encourage you, the one book that's back there that's free, I would encourage you to take it with you, read it, and really see what's going on in our country. It's very sad. But Father, again today, we thank you for just Bridget coming out here, Lord, and sharing with us. And Father, I pray for those of us that are in this room and those that are watching online. Father, I just pray that you would give your people wisdom of how to conduct ourselves, Lord God, in this day and this age. I pray that we would not merely hide in our homes or hide behind the four walls of our church, but Father, I pray that we would understand that the body of Christ is the most dynamic force on the face of the earth. And that, Lord, that we would step out of the four walls of our churches and that we would impact the culture around us. And Father, more than anything, I pray for the next generation. I pray for kids who are steeped in confusion, they're steeped in brokenness. And Jesus, I pray that you would just introduce yourself to this generation. I pray that these kids would understand how much you love them, that you have a plan for them, that you have a destiny and a purpose for them, and that, Lord, more than anything, that you would reveal to them their need for you and what you've done for them. So, Father, today we lift this all up in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. God bless you guys.
They cut me off. No, I'll just remind you guys about the survey in the back, and if you want to sign up. And I also just want to say one thing, too. That bright orange book in the back over there, the one about culture, that is, I haven't gotten through the whole thing. You'll see my little pink bookmark in there. But so far, that is an excellent book. So I do recommend those books over there. If you have any questions about them, feel free to ask me, too. All right, thanks, guys.